Hey guys, tonight we're going to step back, far back into a world before cities, before writing, before even the idea of comfort. A world where the day began with the sound of wind through grass and ended with the soft crackle of fire. No stone houses, no words, just breath hunger and the endless sound of weather. Out there time didn't pass. It waited. The sun rose not to wake anyone but to remind them they'd survived another night. If you enjoy drifting through the quiet corners of human history, take a moment to like the video, subscribe, and tell me where and when you're listening from. It's always strangely comforting to know who else is awake in the dark with me. Now, dim the lights, slow your breath, and let this sleepy historian walk you through the strange, raw, and surprisingly human rhythm of Paleolithic life. The cold, the smoke, the silence. This is where it all began. Imagine waking up in a world where no human voice has ever spoken. No bells, no roofs, no scent of coffee. Only the chill of wind slipping through cracks in the stone, the faint smoke of last night still clinging to the air, and a pale grey light crawling slowly across the damp earth. The sun hasn't risen yet, but you know the day has begun. Not because someone called your name, but because your stomach already growls. Beside you, the fire has died down, leaving only a few faint coals pulsing like the heart of a sick man. There are no clocks, no plans. Only one law: whoever wakes first has a better chance to survive. There were no peaceful mornings in that age. Only silent cold, the wind hissing through dry grass and the smoke creeping down your throat. A world that promises nothing except the need to keep going, even when no one is sure they'll see the firelight again tonight. The wind was humanity's first clock. It didn't ring. It didn't blink. It simply slipped through cracks in the rock-cold damp and achingly real. You open your eyes. No ceiling, no window. Only a low stone roof breathing out the smell of mildew and old ash. The darkness hasn't fully lifted. The first traces of light slide across the wet ground, soft as mist. The cold bites your nose, seeps through the heavy, damp animal hide. Smoke lingers around your body, sharp, acrid, like a memory of the night before. Beside you, a sound barely there. Someone shifting. The dull click of bones under skin and fur. A breath shallow and broken. Here, everything makes a sound, and every sound means something. To survive is to hear what others cannot. You sit up slowly, your hand touching the cold earth. Your back aches. Your shoulders feel heavy. Your breath turns into a thin ghost of vapor. The fire in the center of the cave has died. Only a few glowing coals remain flickering weakly like eyes about to close. Someone leans forward and blows gently. Smoke curls upward in a thin grey ribbon, stinging the nose. A spark flares, then dies. A second breath, the flame catches. It trembles, fragile like a newborn child. No one speaks. Only the wind and the soft crackle of bones snapping in the fire. The sound, uneven quiet, feels familiar, like the heartbeat of the cave itself. The new light throws a glow on grey faces. Eyes sunken, lips cracked, skin dry as earth. No one complains. In this world, complaints don't make you warmer. They just rub their hands together, wait for the heat to spread, and sit still listening to the fire. This warmth, small, fragile, is the last wall between mankind and the dark. Outside, the wind keeps blowing. It weaves through the grass, carrying the smell of mud and wet leaves, sometimes mixed with the scent of beasts. The most alert among them glances toward the mouth of the cave. One wrong flicker, one shadow out of place, and everything changes. Survival isn't instinct. It's a habit carved by fear. You stretch your legs, feeling the ground cold solid. Beneath your feet, fine ash clings to the skin like powder. Some say ash keeps you warm and wards off insects. Maybe, but the truth is simpler. They just have nothing better. A child coughs softly. The mother pulls a hide over its head, her eyes still and heavy. That little sound, that cough, is enough to make every adult's heart tighten. In this season, many won't survive a cough. Medicine back then was nothing more than waiting and hope often failed. Outside, the light brightens just a little. Not sunlight yet, just less darkness. The group stirs like a rusted machine, slow but steady. No one brushes teeth. No one washes their face. They simply inhale deeply, feel the cold carve through their lungs, and begin another day. No one laughs. No one says good morning. Those who live together already know silence is the kindest gesture in this age. Noise attracts predators, and predators never sleep too deeply. The fire burns stronger, now painting the cave walls with trembling red shadows. They sit in a small circle, a fragile ring within a vast frozen universe. From afar you'd see nothing but a faint flicker, a tiny pulse of red trembling on the earth. One fragile spark among endless night. And yet that spark is everything. It is home. It is faith. It is proof that they have not yet been erased. You extend your hands toward the flame. Your palms are cracked, bleeding slightly. The faint metallic scent mingles with the smoke. Strangely, it's a comforting smell, a reminder that you're still alive. In the modern world, people wake because of clocks. Here you wake because of the wind, because of hunger, because of another's breath, because you fear that if you sleep a little longer, something out there will wake before you do. A prehistoric morning didn't begin with light, but with vigilance. Not with hope, but with defense. Every extra day alive is an achievement. Every breath, a silent thank you whispered to the fire. The wind slips through the rocks again, stirring the ashes. The flame bends, almost bows, then steadies itself once more, like humanity itself. Fragile, resilient, and a little sleepy. The fire was the heart of the cave. It breathed with smoke. It ate wood. And it slept too easily. The first task of the morning was to wake it. No one really gave the order, yet everyone knew it had to be done. One man leaned close, took a deep breath, and blew onto the dark red coals, clumped together like a cat's eyes in the dark. The sound of his breath was long and steady like a whispered prayer. Smoke rose thick, stinging, carrying the scent of ash and old fat. A thin spark flickered, trembled, then vanished. He tried again. This time the fire caught a small, obedient flare, as if it had finally been persuaded. No one clapped. No one spoke. They only watched the flame coming back to life, then exhaled together, slow, deliberate. In that world, all life began with a breath and a glimmer. Someone else brought more wood. Dry branches cracked and hissed when they met the flame. The smell of burning wood mingled with smoke, dense yet warm. That warmth spread slowly, not the pleasant kind, but the kind you earn only after being cold long enough. It made the blood flow again, loosened the stiffness in trembling hands. A few reached forward to warm their fingers, watching the light ripple over their skin, thick, cracked, scarred. Every scar a story never told. When the fire steadied, they moved to the second task, repairing tools. One man pulled out a small pouch made of animal hide. Inside were glittering flakes of stone-dried sinew and a few shaped bones. Everything he owned fit inside, small, sharp, fragile. He chose a black stone, glossy, its edge chipped. He placed it on his knee, then tapped it lightly with another rock. Click. A shard fell away, sharp as glass. He kept tapping, slow, precise, until the edge was keen again. No measuring tools. Only feeling the vibration that traveled through skin, through bone, through the pulse of stone. A woman nearby scraped the remaining fat from a bone. The dry rasp of stone against bone merged with the rhythm of the wind. When it was clean, she polished the end smooth, turning it into a handle for a knife. Children watched, eyes wide, unblinking. No one lectured. Learning came from watching and trying again when your turn arrived. All of human knowledge at that moment lived inside calloused hands and the memory of thumbs. Another man sharpened his spear. Its head was stone, its shaft oak bound with sinew. He pulled the tendon tight snap, then licked his fingers, not out of ritual but habit. The salt on his skin reminded him he was still alive. Every tiny sound in the cave blended into a primitive symphony. Click stone against stone, hiss fire consuming wood, snap tendon stretching taut, a long breath. This rhythm, simple, steady, was the heartbeat of the prehistoric morning. If you were there, you'd notice something strange. No one really talked. They didn't need to. They understood one another through movement. One man set down a rock, another handed him sinew. One blew on the fire, another turned the logs. That age had no language as we know it, but it had understanding, rough, quiet, exact. A child reached for a shard of stone. An adult gently pushed the hand away, no scolding. Learning always came with injury, and injury was the teacher. The child withdrew silent, watching longer. He'd try again when courage returned, as his ancestors had done, and his descendants would continue to do for thousands of years. An old man sharpened his axe. His hands trembled, but his strikes stayed true. Each tap carried its own rhythm, like a verse from an ancient song that had lost its words. When he finished, he ran a finger along the edge. A thin line of blood appeared. He smiled faintly, almost in relief. The blade was sharp enough. He smeared the blood along it, not as ritual, just habit. In a world where blood was daily red, had long ceased to frighten anyone. On the cave floor, flakes of stone scattered. A shard sliced into a young man's knee. He winced, sprinkled ash on the wound. Ash stopped the bleeding, dulled the pain. Or maybe it was just dirty enough that no one cared about infection anymore. When the tools were ready, they laid them all on a flat rock: knives, axes, scrapers, spears. That small collection was the essence of human evolution. Not houses, not language, but the ability to sharpen the lifeless and turn it into survival. Each stone was a decision hunt, or be hunted, eat, or be eaten. You might laugh, they're just rocks, but to them, those rocks marked the border between existence and memory. A dull blade could tear your hand, and a torn hand could mean death. So when they sharpened tools each morning, they were really sharpening their chance to live. Every stroke, every chip, every dry click, a small prayer in disguise. Outside, the light grew stronger. The wind shifted, carrying the warmth of the earth. They stood cleaned. The floor rubbed ash into their palms, a crude kind of glove. Behind them, the fire crackled softly, sending up a spiral of ash into the air. The morning ritual was complete. Tend the fire, repair the tools, and accept that everything was fragile. Back then, mankind had no gods, but they already had faith. If the fire still burned and the stones still cut, the world would spare them one more day. There was no such thing as breakfast in this age. Only eat whenever you find something. Sometimes a whole day passed without finding anything at all. Sometimes luck smiled in the form of a tough root, a wild beehive, or the carcass of some creature that had died from causes no one dared to ask about. You step out of the cave. The wind has softened, but it's still sharp enough to sting your ears. The ground is damp and soft, the smell of mud and smoke blending together as if everything in this world were both burning and rotting at once. The air is thick, so thick that when you breathe, you can taste it heavy, moist, faintly sour, with a trace of metal. The group spreads out, each heading in a different direction. No one speaks. In this world, words waste breath and invite trouble. Eyes scan the ground. Hands lift grass, dig soil, pry stones. Every movement is slow, deliberate. They know where roots once grew, where bees once nested, where birds often landed. It's a map of memory kept in the mind, not on paper. You bend down, pry up a small root with a stick. Hard, black, caked with earth. You scrape it roughly and take a bite. Bitter, sharp, but it's food. There's nothing else to compare it to. You chew slowly, teeth grinding against fiber, the taste of soil spreading in your mouth. You chew until your jaw aches, then swallow. It feels like swallowing a handful of wet mud. but your stomach stops growling, and that's enough. Someone else finds a few berries. He doesn't know what kind they are, only remembers that the last time they didn't kill anyone. They share them one berry each, chewing carefully. The taste is so sour, it makes their faces scrunch up astringent, like biting iron, but faintly sweet at the end, the taste of luck. A child licks the juice from its mother's fingers, giggles, then hiccups. Someone exhales softly. The child will live another day. As the sun climbs higher, hot lazy, they start searching for the real delicacies: insects. Grasshoppers, grubs, larvae hiding beneath bark, all protein. The faint crunch when a grasshopper bursts the smell of sizzling fat when roasted over the fire that was prehistoric cuisine. No spices, no salt, only the sound of teeth and smoke mixing with the bitter taste of tiny lives. If luck holds, they might find the body of an animal dead since the night before. No one asks why it died. If the meat is soft, it's still good. A man cuts it with a stone knife. Thick, dark blood oozes out heavy as mud. The smell rises pungent, greasy, warm. They roast it over the fire, but not long. The fire's too weak, and no one has patience. The meat hisses fat, dripping into the coals with tiny pops. The smell fills the cave, intoxicating in a strange primal way, a mix of hunger, smoke, and fleeting joy. They eat with their hands smeared with dirt, ash, and blood. No one cares. Teeth tear, jaws ache, throats dry. They chew in silence. The food isn't good, it just doesn't kill them. Every bite is a small negotiation with nature. Children watch, waiting for bones. They gnaw, suck, lick their fingers. The sound of noon bones cracking dry, chewing the hiss of the wind. No one says, "Enjoy your meal." Only steady breaths and half-closed eyes, heavy with exhaustion. You can see it in their faces. There's no joy in eating, only a momentary relief. Hunger never truly disappears. It just sleeps like the morning fire, and when night falls, it wakes again. Sometimes they eat what they shouldn't, a strange root, a fish that smells wrong. Then someone lies still all day. No one cries. Only silent understanding passes between them. Nature doesn't punish. It selects. If you're from the modern world, you might ask, why didn't they cook longer, choose better? The answer is simple, because they were hungry. When your stomach hardens like stone, you'll eat anything softer than stone. That's why in the first human languages, the word for delicious probably came long after the word for edible. The smells of smoke, meat, and earth blend into one, thick and heavy. The air feels viscous like a pot of cooled grease. Ash and fat stick to their hands, forming a grey film. They don't wash. They just wipe their palms on fur, then grab another piece. Eating isn't a ritual. It's proof that the body still wants to live. After eating, they don't rest. They gather bones, hide leftover scraps from scavengers. A full stomach never means safety, because tomorrow might be empty again. A young man looks at his hands, streaked with ash and grease. He smiles faintly, not out of joy, but because amid the burnt smell he knows he's still alive. Perhaps hunger was humanity's oldest prayer. Not made of words, not carved in stone, just a dry swallow in silence. Evening falls slowly. The light tilts pale and yellow. The wind shifts. That is the signal. No one speaks, but everyone knows it's time to hunt. No drums, no commands, only gestures, a nod, a raised hand, a single held breath. Silence, the only language the forest cannot hear. The men carry spears, javelins, sharp stones. The women and children stay behind, tending the fire. Their shadows stretch long across the damp earth, warped and thin like streaks of thickened smoke. The cold seeps into bone, and the air still holds the smell of burnt fat and damp soil from the midday meal. The meat they had was not enough. They need more. They need something larger. On a distant ridge, the mammoths are moving massive, slow, draped in mud and steam. Each step makes the ground shudder, crushes the grass, splits the mud. From afar, they look like walking clouds, heavy, quiet, and utterly indifferent to being watched. The hunters crawl low, sliding between stones. No one coughs, no one breathes too loud. They've learned how to let their bodies blend with the land, to become part of the terrain itself. The leader raises a hand. Everyone stops. Their eyes fix on the enormous footprints, a head deep, wet, still steaming. The smell of mammoth dung drifts in the wind, rich, sweet, mixed with trampled grass. A smell of hope. The plan is simple as always. One group distracts. Another circles behind. They have only a few spears, a handful of stones, and a great deal of faith. Faith that today the wind will side with them. The leader inhales deeply, then signals. They scatter. Mud reaches their ankles, cold thick. Each step is a silent negotiation with the ground. Don't make a sound. Please. They wait. Long. There is no clock, only fading light. A gust of wind. A distant bellow. The mammoths stop. The first spear flies. A sharp whistle through the air. Then silence. One heartbeat. Two. And then the roar. The herd moves. The ground trembles. Mud explodes. No longer slow, the massive bodies surge forward like waves. Someone falls. Another screams. The scream is lost in the thunder of beasts. No one turns back. No one helps. When the earth itself moves, men are dust. A spear strikes the mammoth's flank. It doesn't stop. Blood bursts out, thick, hot, reeking of iron and smoke. The thrower slips, tumbles into the mud. He laughs a trembling laugh, both proud and terrified. He has touched the gods, and the gods have answered. The herd crashes onward. One limps, falls behind. The group shifts, pursues. No one shouts, but their eyes burn. Not with joy, but with survival. A second spear, then a third. The smell of blood thickens in the wind, mixing with the stale smoke on their skin. When the beast finally collapses, no one cheers, no one dances. They just stand there panting, staring at the enormous body lying still. A moment of quiet, not to give thanks, but to believe it's real. One man steps forward, touches the carcass. Hot. Steam rises from the wound, fading into air. He presses his forehead against the fur, says nothing. Here gratitude is always silent. Then comes the work, cutting, hauling, carrying. No steel blades, only stone, tendon and will. Hands shake. Blood sticks. Breath comes rough and shallow. The smell of raw meat and evening smoke coats the skin. Some of them cry quietly, but no one notices. Maybe it's the wind. Maybe the smoke. By the time they return, the light is gone. The sky has turned to ash. They drag slabs of meat tied with sinew. On the way back, the cold wind rises again. The scent of blood follows them, the warmest smell in a frozen world. Inside the cave, those who stayed behind see them return. No cheers. Just one look enough to understand. The meat is roasted. Fat drips into the fire, sizzling softly. Smoke curls upward, carrying warmth and a scent almost sacred. They eat in silence. Everyone is tired. The meat is tough, stringy, hard to swallow, but no one complains. That charred flavor to them is the taste of life. A young man sits apart, a wound on his leg. Not deep, but filthy. He watches the blood flow, then smiles, weary, bitter. At least today I'm full. No one answers. Only the fire replies with a few quiet hisses. Night descends heavy and thick. Cold smoke creeps toward the mouth of the cave. Outside, the wind turns again, carrying the scent of old blood, damp soil, and a trace of human breath. The day's hunt ends like every other, with exhaustion, wounds, and a meal no one truly enjoys. They don't know if they'll hunt again tomorrow. They only know this tonight. They are still alive. And in that age, that alone was enough. The sun fades, not setting, just retreating, as if someone were quietly gathering up the remaining light. The air grows colder. Its scent changes burnt meat, dried blood, heavy smoke. The chill clings to the bone, but no one notices anymore. They've long grown used to being bitten gently by the wind whenever night comes. The hunters return, their faces streaked with mud, hair clotted with ash, hands stained red. No one speaks. They simply lay the meat near the fire. The ground hisses softly as the fat drips down. An older man places a heavy stone on top, not to cook, but to press down the memory of the day. The fire flares for a moment. Its trembling light spills across tired faces. The smoke is thick, stinging the eyes, but comforting somehow. They sit in a circle, silent. Only the crackle of fire and their breathing intertwine. The smallest child crawls closer, trips over a man's leg, falls and laughs. No one scolds. A mother pulls the child close, wraps it in fur, pats its back. The sound is soft, rhythmic, like the heartbeat of the fire. The men begin dividing the meat. No fine blades, only sharp stones and patience. The meat is tough, the fat thick, the smoke harsh on the throat. They eat slowly, wordlessly. Chewing is labor enough. Grease tastes heavy, ash, dry earth, salty. Every bite is a lesson, never believe you've eaten enough. A young man cleans a wound with smoke. He holds his hand over the fire, flinches, then smiles faintly. As long as it hurts, he says, I'm alive. No one answers. The fire crackles as if nodding. After the meal, no one leaves. No one ever leaves into the cold night. Instead, they sit around the fire slowly, quietly, as they did the night before, and as they will for hundreds of thousands of nights to come. An old man begins to speak. His voice is rough, slow, almost a whisper. No one knows who his story is about or whether it's true. But they listen. In a world without writing, stories are the second home. He speaks of a beast as large as a hill, whose footsteps shook the ground. Of a river that could sing. Of a woman who became the wind. No one understands it all. They don't need to. Language exists so that voices can be remembered. The children drift off, half dreaming. The adults stay still, gazing into the fire. The flames sway their light, dancing across the cave walls, shapes moving like living things, beasts, hands, people running. Perhaps it's illusion, or perhaps it's the first lesson in telling stories with images. A young man strikes two stones together. Click. Another taps a hollow log with a bone. Thok, thok, thok. Fire, stone, bone. Together they form a rhythm, not quite music, but the closest thing humanity had to it. They begin to hum. No words, just long, slow breaths, repeated, layered. A kind of melody not meant to be sung, but to keep existing. The voices merge with the wind with the smoke with the night. No one says it, but everyone knows this is the first music of humankind. It isn't for joy. It isn't for sorrow. It exists simply to make the silence less deep. Smoke thickens, curling through the air. The firelight paints the cave walls. Old drawings reappear. Deer handprints, spears, circles. Someone presses their palm over a painted hand. The rough, warm skin rests upon the cold outline of someone who died many seasons ago. The fire flickers. The living and the past merge in shadow. Amid the smoke, they meet their ancestors without needing names. A child wakes in the middle of the night, staring at the fire. Is the fire ever tired? The child whispers. The mother smiles softly. It only sleeps. No one realizes it. But in that answer lies a philosophy. Everything that exists endures only by keeping its flame alive. Not just the one made of wood, but the one inside of memory, of story, of breath. The night grows longer. Someone nods off, head on knees, shoulder to shoulder. The fire shrinks, but the warmth of human breath remains. Smoke drifts thin and slow across faces blurred in red light. No one says goodnight. Here, sleep needs no invitation. It arrives like the wind, quietly and enough. On the cave wall, their shadows dance, each one a story a breath. Some short, some broken, some fading as the coals dim. But in that moment, amid wind and ash, humanity becomes a living memory. Outside darkness covers the valley. The fire is the only light in a world without lamps, a single red spark, small but stubborn, just like humankind itself. They will stay awake a little longer. Someone finishes the end of an unfinished story, then they sleep. No dreams, no hopes, only smoke breath and the slow rhythm of a dying flame, a heartbeat shared between man and fire. The fire fades. Light draws inward, folding itself deep within the cave like the last breath of the day running out. Ash drifts upward, weightless, swirling slowly through air heavy with the scent of smoke and animal hide. On the walls, the shadows of people blur, shivering, bending, then dissolving into darkness. Only the warmth remains, the sound of breathing, a faint rustle somewhere in the dark. The cold returns, slipping into every seam of skin, every crack in the stone. No one speaks a final word. They don't need to. Everything has already been said in smoke, in the last flicker of a dying ember, in stories half told, through trembling hands and breath. They sleep, unaware that tonight they have done the greatest thing humanity ever. Would they kept the fire alive? Because when they breathed upon the embers, they weren't just warming flesh. They were keeping memory warm, keeping words alive, keeping the very idea that survival itself was a way of telling a story. Their lives were short, dirty, full of wind, but amid the ashes they had kindled the first stories of humankind. Tens of thousands of years later, the fire still burns. Only now it no longer fits within a human hand, it stretches across the sky. Long ago people trembled as they guarded their flames, seeking warmth, pushing back the dark. Now their descendants have learned to recreate the Sunday. The fire of the cave became a blinding white light over the deserts of New Mexico, where the airs of those who once blew on embers breathed life into fire again. Only this time the fire of the atom. The age has changed. Only one truth remains. Human beings still play with fire, still convinced they can control the light they themselves have made. 1938. A group of German scientists dropped a small fragment of uranium into a laboratory reactor, and the color of the world changed. There was no explosion, no flash of light, only a reaction so silent it was terrifying. Atoms once thought indivisible suddenly broke apart. From a lifeless fragment of matter, they had found a way to divide matter itself. Some said it was the first time humanity touched the divine, not through prayer but through mathematics. In that cold room, as the gauge needle trembled, and a faint green light spread through a glass tube, no one realized they had opened a door. One that once opened, no one would ever have the courage to close again. The news spread slowly like cigarette smoke, drifting down a university hallway. Someone heard it and smiled. Someone else said nothing and took notes. But one man, Leo Szilard, couldn't sleep. He understood that if energy could be released through fission, then, with enough uranium, the world would soon know a new kind of fire. Szilard went to the one person who could make the world listen, Albert Einstein. Einstein, old, now living quietly on Long Island, his hair grey as fog, his eyes tired. He no longer wished to speak for governments or armies. But Szilard urged him, if others do this first, they will not use it to give light. August 1939. A short letter, 3 pages, typed on an old machine, began with a simple line. Some recent work by Fermi and Szilard suggests that uranium could soon become a new and important source of energy. Einstein signed it and sent it to President Franklin D. Roosevelt. It wasn't a plea, it was a warning. The letter never mentioned war. It spoke only of potential. But like every warning in history, it reached the hands of someone ready to turn potential into a weapon. And so, from a smoke-filled desk in Berlin, through a trembling signature on Long Island, to the vest pocket of an American president, the second fire of humanity began to burn quietly. Einstein never met Robert Oppenheimer at that time, but fate, as always, finds ways to bring those drawn to the same flame together. Oppenheimer, known simply as Oppie, was young, thin, soft-spoken, with eyes that always looked farther than the walls around him. A true genius, but one who never quite belonged anywhere. At Berkeley, where he taught quantum physics, he smoked endlessly and read Sanskrit poetry. Amid equations and chalk dust, he once wrote a line from the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." That was before he ever knew the bomb. Perhaps that echo had always lived inside him, just waiting for a reason to awaken. In 1942, America began recruiting for a nameless project. A network of scattered minds gathered like coals around a single flame. Einstein wasn't invited. He was too famous, too peaceful, too dangerous for a secret. Oppenheimer, however, was chosen. Not because he was dangerous, but because he understood what danger meant. A group of them built tents in the New Mexico desert. No one was allowed to ask why, only when will it be done. They were promised knowledge victory, and in a moment of human weakness, immortality of name. A promise that, like fire, was beautiful from afar and burning up close. On his first night in Los Alamos, Oppenheimer stood beneath the open sky. No electric light, only wind and sand. He looked up at millions of stars, those natural reactors humanity had never reached. And he wondered, are we about to create what the universe took billions of years to understand? The answer, of course, was yes, but no one said it aloud. They simply bent their heads and worked like the firekeepers of the ancient caves, except now their flame was invisible. Inside the barbed wire laboratories, clock hands moved slowly, and dangerous ideas were drawn in chalk, then erased by nicotine-stained fingers. It was said that some nights, Oppenheimer couldn't sleep. He would walk alone through the desert, hands in his coat pockets, murmuring that same verse from the Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." But every morning he returned to his desk to write another formula and to stay silent. That is what humans do best, to work, as if they do not know the consequences. And Einstein, he read the newspapers, heard of the atomic project, and said only one thing: "Had I known it would come to this, I would never have signed that letter." But the fire was already burning, and no one could put it out. From a brief letter and a quiet reaction, to thousands of people building a city in the desert, to imprison an idea. And at the center of it all, a thin man with glasses and a soft voice, learning how to do what the gods had done at the dawn of time. Humanity did not yet learn to fly, but it had learned how to burn the sky. And like their ancestors gathered around a cave fire, they too huddled together, not to tell stories, but to forge eternal light. A light so bright that even the gods had to blink. The New Mexico desert winter of 1943. A convoy of unmarked trucks turned onto cracked, wind-beaten earth, where the sun shimmered against unfinished wooden frames and rows of barbed wire. No signs, no maps. But in the middle of nowhere, a city was being built in secret. Los Alamos. The name sounded like wind, but there was no freedom here. It was a modern cave, sealed quiet, and glowing with an artificial light no one was allowed to question. There wasn't just one. Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Hanford, Washington. 3 places, 3 hearts beating in the same rhythm. The slow, heavy breath of a creature growing in silence. In total, more than 130,000 people lived and worked in these nameless towns: engineers, laborers, chemists, janitors, cooks, doctors, soldiers' wives, and children. They arrived, signed papers, stayed quiet, and vanished from the old world. Everyone knew they were doing something important. No one knew what it was. Rules hung on every wall, Don't ask, don't tell, just work. Metal badges replaced names, only numbers. Mail was censored. When a child was born, the birth certificate read only place of birth unknown facility. A generation born behind locked doors, where secrecy itself was the air they breathed. And so they built a parallel society, a small world powered by fear, faith, and weekly paychecks. People bought milk, did laundry, watched movies, smiled at neighbors, never knowing they were together building a second Sunday. At Los Alamos, they said the nightlight looked different. Not warm yellow like city lamps, but white cold, and still as if even the bulbs knew how to keep secrets. Oppenheimer walked among them, his wide-brimmed hat pulled low. Not a general, not a prophet, just a man trying to arrange order inside chaos. They called him the father of the bomb, but on long nights he looked more like a father too afraid to watch his child grow up. Once when asked what they were doing, he gave a weary smile. We're trying to see if we can make the sun rise twice. At Oak Ridge, where uranium was enriched, the air thrummed with the steady hum of compressors and turbines. Young women stood for hours at control panels, turning dials, reading numbers, unaware their hands were guiding the first chain reactions in history. When asked what they did, they'd answer simply, "It's for the war effort." And that was enough. Ignorance became a form of patriotism. Far away in Hanford, buried in dust and snow, plutonium was born, a substance no one had ever seen, touched, or dared to imagine. A small, dense metal, both miracle and death sentence. Workers later recalled that each morning leaving the reactor buildings, their lips tasted of metal and their clothes glowed faintly in the dark. They laughed, saying it was the light of a good day's work. None of them realized they were carrying the light of the world's ending. Each secret city had churches, bars, schools, music, weddings, even cheerful songs. A world so ordinary it bordered on absurd, because beneath it, nuclear reactions whispered day and night. Children played in yards, adults drank beer, and when darkness fell, each town glowed in even white light. No one asked where it came from. Perhaps, as Oppenheimer once said, the light always hides the shadow that made it. A young woman from Oak Ridge would later write in her memoir, "We never asked questions. We didn't want to know. Knowing felt dangerous." And so secrecy was sustained by innocence, a very human kind of innocence, and the easiest kind to exploit. At Los Alamos, where the scientists lived side by side, people said that on cold nights you could hear faint tapping metal against metal from labs that never slept. That sound, they said, was like the beating of a collective heart, steady, exhausted, unending. An orchestra of minds rewriting the definition of light. Secrecy in that era was more than military protocol. It was a new religion. People didn't need to understand, only to believe someone above them knew what they were doing. But at the core of every faith lies fear. And in that fear, Los Alamos, Oak Ridge, and Hanford flickered like three trembling lanterns, illuminating an age where darkness was no longer natural. One day, when the work was finished, the workers left. The signs were taken down. The cities disappeared from maps as though they had never existed. Only strange lights remained in the sand, and questions no one wished to answer. They had built caves once again, this time, from concrete and steel, and gathered around the fire once more. But now not to stay warm, to light the very end of darkness itself. The New Mexico desert, before dawn, July 16th, 1945. The sky was black, silent and cold. Wind slid across fine sand, carrying the scent of rust explosives and the sweat of those who hadn't slept in 3 days. On a barren stretch of land called Jornada del Muerto, the Journey of the Dead, they had raised a steel tower tall as a prayer, and at its peak, sealed inside a metal sphere, lay something that had never existed before, a man-made sun, waiting to be awakened. Below it, hundreds hid in bunkers, Scientists, soldiers, doctors, night guards, all waiting for the same moment. One man counted, another took notes. Most simply breathed. No one said it, but everyone knew after this the world would never be the same. Oppenheimer sat in a bunker, cigarette glowing faintly against his tired eyes. Someone asked if he was afraid. He exhaled and said quietly, "I'm not sure if we should hope it works, or hope it doesn't." 4:59 a.m. A calm voice came over the radio. 0-1 minute. Some lay flat, some closed their eyes. One turned his back, not wanting to witness what once belonged only to the gods. 5:29 and 45 seconds. Light. No words were enough. It wasn't light, it was the absence of darkness. It expanded, flooded the desert, rose into the sky, and fell back upon the trembling faces below. They said it was brighter than the sun, and for the first few seconds no one heard a thing. No explosion, only light, and the feeling that everything old had been stripped away. Then came the shockwave, a delayed answer from the earth itself. A roar that rattled bones rolled across the mountains and came back again. Sand flew, the ground quivered, and in that instant, everyone understood humans had just learned how to destroy themselves. A young soldier later said, "It felt like the end of the world, but it was so beautiful I couldn't look away." And Oppenheimer, he said nothing for several minutes. He only stared and whispered like a man hearing an old prophecy fulfilled. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Not pride, a confession. As the light faded, a strange cloud rose, a slow swelling mushroom of dust and fire. Some clapped, some cried. The rest just stood there, unsure if they had achieved victory or committed a sin. Physicist Kenneth Bainbridge turned to Oppenheimer and muttered, "Now we are all sons of bitches." Oppenheimer smiled faintly, as if he had known that all along. After the blast, soldiers picked through the scorched sand, collecting shards of green glass, trinitite, the first new substance born of a nuclear explosion. They kept it as souvenirs. Some pocketed it, some gave it to sweethearts. No one knew it glowed faintly in the dark. The report sent to Washington began with 4 words. The test was successful. Just 4, but behind them stretched the silence of centuries. No one realized that in that blinding flash, a boundary had vanished between creation and destruction, between genius and guilt. When night fell again, the desert was dark as before. But none of them could ever see darkness the same way. One man wrote in his diary, "The desert looked peaceful again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was only pretending." Oppenheimer left soon after, riding in the back of a jeep, silent, staring at the horizon still burning faintly red. No one spoke, only the steady hum of the engine and wind through the window. In his mind, the Sanskrit words repeated, a broken prayer for the age of metal. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." He didn't say it aloud, but perhaps he already knew he had awakened a god mankind would never lull back to sleep. Days later, Los Alamos threw a party. Music, laughter, whiskey. Someone raised a glass to the dawn of a new era, and they cheered, not realizing that the dawn they toasted was the same one that had ignited over Jornada del Muerto, a dawn that ever since had never truly gone out. The next morning, Oppenheimer wrote a single line in his notebook, "The world is not the same." And it wasn't. Because humankind had done what its ancestors once dreamed, rekindled the first fire of the world. Only this time, no one was brave enough to sit around it. 3 weeks after the Trinity test, the world still knew nothing. At Los Alamos, the work continued. Blueprints multiplied. Equations grew. Inside the compound, they whispered 2 short names: innocent, almost playful, yet deeply cruel little boy. Fat Man. No one saw the contradiction. In war, everything makes sense, even when that sense is written in uranium. August 6, 1945. Morning over Hiroshima, clear as glass. Children walking to school, vendors setting up stalls. The soft clack of wooden sandals echoing down the street. 9,000 meters above a silver aircraft approached, carrying a bomb over 4 tons in weight, with words scrawled across its side. Little boy, 8:15 a.m. A flash, then silence. No one heard the explosion. No one had time to pray. The city disappeared, as if it had never been real. They said that at the blast's center, human shadows were burned onto the walls, sharp, perfect, as though the people had merely been swallowed by light. A survivor would later say, "I saw a flash, then my shadow burned into the ground." For a few seconds, sound ceased to exist. Then the wind returned, carrying dust ash and the scent of hot metal. 3 days later, Nagasaki. Light morning rain. People thought a storm was coming. Instead, the sky brightened again. White, then orange, then grey. A witness recalled, "It was as if the sun fell to the earth, and we were under it." Over 100,000 lives ended in moments. No music, no heroes. Only silence. In the days that followed, the rain began to fall. No one understood why the water was black. Children ran out to catch it, then collapsed. They called it black rain. No image could capture it. No words could describe it. Only the sound of footsteps, survivors walking through ash, carrying the memory of a city that no longer existed. Across the Pacific, when the news reached Los Alamos, some cheered, some wept, and Oppenheimer stayed silent. He was summoned to the White House to meet President Truman. Truman shook his hand and laughed. "You did it, Doctor. You won the war." Oppenheimer replied softly, almost whispering, "Mr. President, I feel I have blood on my hands." Truman frowned, turned to his aide, and after Oppenheimer left, muttered, "Don't let that crybaby in here again." But Oppenheimer didn't need to return. He carried victory like a shadow, one that could never be washed away. Years later, he would say, in some crude sense which no vulgarity, no humor, no overstatement can quite extinguish, the physicists have known sin. It wasn't repentance. It was truth, bare, weary, undeniable. The world called it the dawn of the atomic age. Others called it the twilight of humanity, the dawn of atoms, the dusk of mankind. A century ago, humans lit fires to see more clearly. Now they burned so brightly that they could see nothing at all. There exists a short film shot from a plane showing the mushroom cloud rising above Hiroshima. No sound, no music, just light and smoke rolling upwards slowly, as if the world had taken a deep breath and then stopped breathing. Nearby survivors said that the first night after the bombing, the sky glowed red, an endless sunset. Fires burned for days. People searched for loved ones in silence, hearing only the sound of ash falling. An old woman would later recall, there were no screams left, only breathing. The world heard the news, half rejoiced, half fell silent. But in that silence, no one asked the simplest question, should we have done what we could? Science had answered yes. History was not so sure. Oppenheimer returned to Los Alamos. He walked past empty barracks and quiet rooms through a city that had outlived its purpose. At dusk, he paused, watching his cigarette smoke fade into the air, like the smoke of cities that once existed. The fire had risen, and now it began to fall. That night, he wrote in his journal, "The physicists have built a new sin, and the world has learned to live with it." Perhaps he was right. Humanity has always known how to live with what it cannot undo, even with light, even with ash. One day when people tell the story of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they will speak of victory, of the end of war, of peace, bought with light. But in the dust still drifting through the upper air, a simpler truth remains. We burned ourselves just to see our shadows more clearly. The war ended, but the world did not rest. It merely learned a new way to tremble. As cities were rebuilt, humanity raised yet another fire, not for warmth, but to threaten one another in the dark. A new age began, the Cold War. The name sounded frozen, but inside it burned. 2 artificial suns, one over Washington, one over Moscow. blazed not to illuminate, but to warn. They called it MAD, mutually assured destruction, a concept both logical and perfectly insane. In those years, the night sky looked different, not just from electric lights spreading across the earth, but because the clouds of nuclear tests still hadn't faded. Nevada, Kazakhstan, Bikini, Semipalatinsk. Ordinary names turned into scars on the map of humankind. Each time the ground shook somewhere in silence, someone wrote in a notebook, "The fire still burns, only colder now." Oppenheimer went back to work lecturing, writing reports, saying little. He was summoned to hearings, questioned about spies, about communists, about old friends who had once shared dinner at his house. He sat quietly, hands clasped, eyes still as old water. When asked, "Did you ever share classified information?" he replied, slowly, "I have given them nothing except my concern." But in an age of fear, even concern was considered a crime. In 1954, the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission revoked his security clearance. A secret trial, no sentence, no shackles, just a man severed from the fire he had created. He listened to the verdict, nodded, and stood. No protest, no defense. As if he had known this would come since that first flash of light in the Trinity desert. Afterward, Oppenheimer lived on small islands, Princeton, then Street John. He read poetry, sailed, taught students about quantum mechanics, and sometimes sat for hours just staring at the sea. People said he smoked constantly, watching each falling ember, as if it were a star dying. A student once asked him, "Do you regret what you've done?" He answered, voice tired but soft as smoke, "Physicists are not the ones who decide how light is used. We only learn how to make it." The world slowly forgot the first days of fire. Bombs became numbers chart strategies. Words like megaton, deterrence, retaliation replaced firelight and fear. And Oppenheimer, he became a thin shadow in history spoken of, with both reverence and unease, the father of the atomic bomb, the father of something he feared. In a rare lecture at Caltech, he stood before a hall of young students, light glinting faintly off his silver hair. He spoke slowly, almost in a whisper, "The physicists have known sin." Then he fell silent for a very long time. A student later recalled that no one dared to cough, only the ticking of a clock and the sound of breathing. Meanwhile, America pressed forward, hydrogen bombs, ballistic missiles, early warning systems. Once again, mankind believed it could control fire. But Oppenheimer no longer believed. In one of his final interviews, he said, "When you see something that is technically sweet, you go ahead and do it, and you argue about the moral consequences later." It sounded like a tired smile and a summary of the entire century. In 1962, he was invited to the White House, not for forgiveness, but for recognition. President Kennedy intended to award him a medal, but was assassinated before he could. Lyndon Johnson presented it later, in a quiet ceremony where Oppenheimer bowed his head and said nothing. The last night anyone saw him sitting alone on the porch was the summer of 1966. City lights reflected in the sky like distant stars. He sat there, cigarette in hand, looking out. Perhaps he was remembering the New Mexico desert, where the first light rose, and where part of his humanity began to melt. Smoke drifted slowly. Ash blew away. And in that moment he resembled the forgotten Paleolithic ancestor, a man blowing gently on embers, keeping fire alive in his hands, never realizing the fire would someday consume him. Tens of thousands of years earlier, the Paleolithic human breathed into coals to stay warm. Oppenheimer breathed into uranium to make light. Both trembled before the same thing, fire. Only this time, one sat around the flame to survive the other, to understand why he was alone. When Oppenheimer died, his ashes were scattered into the sea. No monument, no marching band, only the sound of waves and a pale shimmer on the water. They said the sun rose later than usual that morning, perhaps because it was tired. The Paleolithic man warmed himself by fire to survive. The modern man created fire to rule and then trembled in its light. The Paleolithic man blew softly into embers to keep warm, holding fire in his hands, as if it were the breath of life itself. Modern man blew into uranium, creating a sun in the middle of the night, and called it progress. Thousands of years have passed, and we have only changed the kind of fire from wood to atom, from warmth to burning. But what has never changed is the fear. Across the ages, the light still flickers, and humanity still sits around it, entranced, afraid like a child, staring at something it can never truly understand. Perhaps in every age we do not seek light to see more clearly, but to have something bright enough to hide the darkness within. Oppenheimer learned how to make the sunday, but he never learned how to look at it without closing his eyes. And perhaps that fragile blindness is what still makes him and all of us human. When the light grew too bright, humans began to search for ways to soften it. From the ashes of old fires, they wove the first fabric, a thin boundary between body and world, between nakedness and meaning. Light gave birth to fire, fire gave birth to shadow, and shadow gave birth to clothing, morning on the land between two rivers. The wind carries the scent of wet clay furnace smoke and a faint trace of linseed oil still lingering in the air. Far away, the sun slides upward, slowly reflecting off the reddish tiles of kiln-fired roofs. This is Mesopotamia, where humans learned to write, to measure time, and also to dress, not for warmth, but for distinction. From the earliest days, the people of Mesopotamia treated fabric like law. Priests in the temple of Iana wore long white robes, woven from refined wool, the fibers combed again and again until soft as breath. Commoners wore coarse wool, grey as ash, brown as dust. Slaves sometimes had nothing but a strip of cloth tied around the waist. A single glance at a garment could tell who was seen by the gods and who was forgotten by them. The familiar sound of an ancient city was not the turning of wheels, but the rhythm of looms. Clack, clack, endless, steady, hypnotic. Each pull of thread, each strike of shuttle was an unwritten decree, the law of the fiber, binding humans together. The Sumerians had a proverb, "Cloth is civilization." It sounds simple, but it was a declaration of order, for to them fabric did not merely cover the body. It constrained it, it defined it. It turned the animal into something ranked, named, and measured. On clay tablets, kings are carved wearing tiered robes, each fold layered like waves, each pleat a symbol of hierarchy. The thicker the fabric, the greater the cost, for it meant more hands at work, more sheep shorn, more breath spent to keep one man warm. Even the gods were depicted in layered garments, as if the heavens themselves obeyed the laws of tailoring. In the temples, women known as Naditu were allowed to wear cloth dyed celestial blue, a hue made from copper salts and ground lapis lazuli. That color was sacred, the same shade as the sky when the god Enlil walked across it. For an ordinary person to wear it was not theft, it was blasphemy, because in Mesopotamia color was language, and everyone could read it. Between the narrow lanes of and Lagash weavers sat beneath reed canopies, their hands moving so fast they seemed to pray. They were not rich yet, they wove the entire social order. When a cloth was finished, it wasn't just sold, it was recorded, weighed, taxed. For the first time in history, beauty had a price. In palace ceremonies, when the king appeared, people did not look at his face, they looked at his robe. Each fringe, each repeated motif carried meaning. A small ziggurat pattern meant chosen by the gods. A golden thread at the collar meant lord of land and water. During coronations, each stitch was recited aloud like a spell. Clothing was not an object. It was a ritual language, one spoken only by the elite. Meanwhile, farmers wore rough wool hardened by sweat after each harvest. They had no colors of their own, only the smell of soil and the hue of seasons. And yet it was they who sustained the entire system of cloth. They sheared the sheep, spun the fibers, washed and dyed them, and watched their work disappear into the cities, into the hands of people they were forbidden to meet the eyes of. Sometimes at night moonlight slipped through dry wooden shutters, and a lone weaver kept working. The light caught on the woolen threads glinting faintly like strands that reached from earth to heaven. Perhaps in that moment he too felt himself part of something larger, an unseen web of power, faith, and fiber. When the Mesopotamians invented writing, they didn't begin with war or love. They began with taxes, debt, and cloth. That tells you everything. For them, order began with what touched the skin. A modern scholar once said civilization began when humans learned to cover themselves, not from shame but from structure. And perhaps he was right. Because in Mesopotamia, we don't just see the birth of clothing. We see the moment humanity began to weave the world to control it. Every thread was a border, every color a decree, every fold a quiet reminder freedom has never looked soft. Morning in Egypt begins with light, not the gentle dawn of Mesopotamia, but a white brilliance sharp as a bell shattering over sand. It spills across the Nile, climbs the stone walls, the carved faces, and the linen sheets laid out to dry. If Mesopotamia wove order, then Egypt learned to wear eternity. Here white is not merely a color, it is the language of the soul. The linens were so fine that sunlight could pass through them, spun from flax left to dry, then washed again and again in the Nile, until it turned soft as breath and cool as midnight water. White meant purity, and purity in this civilization was closeness to the divine. Everything in Egyptian life was wrapped in ritual. Even the act of dressing was a prayer. A man wound linen around his waist, tying the knot on the left, the side of the heart. A woman slipped into a long gown reaching her ankles, bare-shouldered, perfumed with myrrh and lotus resin. The scent drifted through the air, sweet, warm, and eternal. For in Egypt, fragrance was not meant to seduce, but to please the dead. Inside the tombs, archaeologists found thousands of rolls of linen folded, labeled inked with tiny hieroglyphs. None of it was random. Each piece was a blessing. Each layer wrapped around a body was a verse of prayer. The Egyptians believed the soul would need its body again in the afterlife, and that body must be perfect. Fold by fold, wrap by wrap, they tried to bind time itself inside a garment. Gold, meanwhile, was for the undying, because gold was the color of the sun, and the sun to them never perished. When a pharaoh wore the golden crown, he was not merely a ruler, he was Ra walking the earth. Gold leaf on statues, coffins, and burial robes was not for vanity, but to imitate divine light. In Egypt, gold was proof that you would not decay. At midday in the palace, the air smelled of hot wax and perfumed oil. Attendants dressed the queen in silence. A thick black wig braided like flowing rivers framed her face. Kohl lined her eyes, drawn outward toward the temples. It was not beauty, it was protection, a spell against the gaze of the afterlife. When the light struck the oiled sheen of her skin, she no longer looked human, but like a living statue, half flesh, half symbol. During ceremonies, priests walked through incense smoke, their white robes fluttering like desert wind. They believed only through a purified body could the gods see the soul beneath the cloth. They did not beg, they performed order. Even in death there was structure, wrapping, oiling, inscribing silence. If Mesopotamia wove power, Egypt tailored eternity. Here beauty was not for attraction, but for the comfort of the next world. The weaver's hands did not labor for the living, but for those about to cross the hall of judgment. They wove in silence, believing words would weaken the thread. Only silence could preserve the soul. In the late afternoon, linens drying on rooftops looked like white boats drifting in air. Children ran below laughing. as the Nile wind caught the fabric, making it billow like spirits leaving their forms. No one was afraid. In Egypt, death was not an ending, only a change of clothes. On the tomb wall of the priest Ankhaf, it is written, "As the gods wrap the sky around the world, so we wrap linen around the body." That said it all. In Egypt, clothing did not conceal death, it gave death its shape. At dusk in the golden temple of Luxor, torches flickered against white linen. The sound of the river echoed steady, soft as Ra's breath. A priest laid his hand upon a mummy and whispered, "May your linen never fray, may your soul never fade." Then he withdrew, leaving the body white fragrant, as if asleep in the arms of light. The Mesopotamians wove order from wool. The Egyptians wove eternity from light. And between sand and soul they found what every civilization longs for: a way to resist decay. Under the Mediterranean sun, light casts no shadow. It falls straight onto marble shoulders, and across the men draped in long folds of cloth. Chiton Himation toga, no buttons, no stitches, only folds, gravity and discipline. If Egypt dressed to approach the gods, Greece dressed to become reason itself. In Athens, no one spoke of fashion. They spoke of proportion. A wrong fold was a wrong thought. A tangled drape, a tangled mind. Fabric did not fall by chance. It obeyed gravity, the only law even the gods could not break. In the agora, the tailor was not an artist, but a geometer. He measured by eye, folded by angle, reasoned by shoulder. And when a young man wrapped himself in a chiton, he was not merely clothed, he was aligned. Each fold a line of logic, each curve a theorem. The body became a map of order, and cloth its proof. The Greeks believed beauty was not decoration but balance, and so even clothing bowed to logos. The white himation that draped a philosopher was both garment and declaration of clarity, of restraint. No color, no pattern, only light and curve. Between them they found what it meant to be human. A Greek poet once wrote, "We wore the wind, and it obeyed form." Here fabric was tamed, air moving, but never chaotic. Soft, yet ruled by proportion. Like Greek philosophy itself, born from motion of thought, ending in the stillness of equilibrium. The Romans inherited all of it and turned fabric into law. The toga, nearly 6 meters of heavy wool, folded 7 precise times around the body. No one could put it on alone, you needed help. As with law, no one made it by himself. The toga was the uniform of citizenship. Only free Roman men could wear it. Not slaves, not foreigners, not women. Cloth once again marked the boundary of dignity. In the Senate, magistrates wore toga praetexta white, with a purple border the color of command. At funerals, they wore toga pulla, dark heavy, a reminder that even law bows before death. The Romans had a saying, "A man's folds reveal his virtue." If your fabric wrinkled, you lack discipline. If your folds were clean, you were trustworthy. Thus, even morality was tailored. A cold order woven from wool and faith that everything could and should be shaped by rule. But between those layers of disciplined fabric, there was always space where light slipped in, and one saw the truth. Even wrapped in reason, man still wore instinct. The soldier drank. The senator schemed. The noblewoman perfumed her skin to say what could not be spoken. Even in the empire of order, cloth remembered the scent of flesh. At night, as Rome slept on marble balconies, a guard's white toga swayed in the wind, a ghost of civilization. A thin fabric between man and eternity. It covered the body, but not its fragility. Someone once said, "If Egypt dressed for gods, and Greece dressed for reason, Rome dressed for power. But power in the end is only another piece of cloth folded, stored in dust, waiting for someone else to wear." As time passed, togas turned to statues, and statues turned to dust. Only the shapes remained frozen, folds of stone silent, obedient to proportion. As if the Greeks and Romans, even in death, still taught us how to stand upright, how to fold cloth, how to think. In their civilization of stone and resin, fabric was the only thing left soft. And in that softness, humanity remembered what it once felt like to be touched. It was no accident that the monarchs of the East chose silk as the language of power. In Mesopotamia, thread was order. In Egypt, it was eternity. In Greece, it was reason. But in Persia and India, thread was light, woven by hand. Across the Iranian plateau, the wind carried the scent of rose oil, amber, and cedarwood. A weaver sat by his loom, his hands moving slowly like a prayer. Every line of gold he embroidered on the emperor's robe was not decoration. It was a map of the sky. The Persians did not see clothing as garments. They saw it as a folded universe. The walls of Persepolis still remember rows of courtiers bearing gifts, lapis lazuli, crimson cloth, ivory, and gold. They moved through the gate of all nations like a procession of stars. No noise, no words. Only color: red, blue, gold, jade. Each hue a vow of allegiance. In the palace, the emperor wore a kaftan stitched with gold thread, the fabric thick, yet soft, its patterns of winged spirits and Zoroastrian fire rings. He believed that when he stood in the great hall, the gold on his robe would catch the sun's light, so that Ahura Mazda would see him first. Clothing was no longer a mark of class. It was a beacon to heaven. The Persians had a strange belief: color is the shadow of heaven. And so they wove rainbows into their robes, not to flaunt, but to bring heaven down to earth. When Persian merchants traveled the Silk Road, their fabrics carried the scent of incense and gold to India, where color itself became a religion. Here, garments were not merely worn, they were offered. Cloth for the gods, cloth for the rivers, cloth for one another. A child was born wrapped in cotton, and when they died, they were wrapped again in the same fabric, simple but sacred. On the banks of the Ganges, women washed their hair with sandalwood ash, rubbed their skin with turmeric, and wrapped themselves in saris. No buttons, no seams, just 6 yards of cloth folded, twisted, released a dance made of fabric. Each style of drape spoke its own language. A widow white, a bride red, a nun pale gold, like dawn's first light. And always the edge of the sari touched the ground, a reminder that beauty too must bow. In the West, they worshipped reason. In India, they worshipped breath. Clothing did not define class but state of soul. The yogi wore coarse robes the color of dust to blend with ash and earth. The nobleman wore gold-stitched silk, but in ritual he stripped it all away to stand before the divine as he was born. Everything returned to nakedness, and because of that, everything here was beautiful in its weariness. Indian weavers needed no sketches. They wove by pulse, one thread, one breath. The warp and weft crossing like karma, tangled yet ordered. A single cloth could take a month to complete. When finished, the weaver laid a hand on it and whispered, "If the gods see this, may they smile." Jewelry in the East was never just adornment, it was protection. Each stone, each carving a charm, a wish, a promise. Emerald for wisdom, ruby for strength, gold for a soul that would not decay. An Indian empress once told her maid, "I don't wear gold, I wear memory." And she was right. In the East, ornaments are memories polished until they shine. At dusk, light drifted through incense smoke, catching on gold threads that glittered like stars on fabric. The air smelled of jasmine and burnt sandalwood, sweet, sharp, and serene. The whole room became a small universe where fabric, scent, and light merged into a single prayer. Persia dressed to speak to the gods, India dressed to speak to the self. Two worlds meeting in radiance, not cold like Greek marble, not pale like Egyptian linen, but warm, burning, sacred. A Western traveler once wrote after leaving India, "Their clothes are not worn, they are inhabited." He was right. Here people do not wear their garments, they live inside their colors. And when night comes, the golden threads sleep in darkness, the silk pools softly on the floor, and only the scent remains, the faint proof that heaven once passed through this place and never quite left. In the East, fabric was never just something to wear. It was ritual, it was law, it was order. And among all the empires of the East, none understood that better than China. Here, clothing did not belong to the body, it belonged to the cosmos. Heaven had 5 elements. Man had 5 virtues, and fabric too had 5 destinies. Color was not preference, it was fate. Yellow the hue of earth, and the center belonged to the Son of Heaven alone, the axis around which all others turned. Red for ceremony, green for spring, black for water, white for morning. But yellow, that was the color of the one who stood between heaven and man. In the Tang Palace, light slid across lacquered walls and golden silk curtains. Officials knelt below the throne, each wearing the right shade, the right rank. No one dared mistake. A color to do so was to offend the balance of the world. Even the stitches had hierarchy: 3 for nobility, 2 for duty, 1 for servitude. The needle, therefore, was not a tool but a dividing line between worlds. Behind the veil, the empress prepared her ceremonial robes. 5 layers, each one for an element: earth, water, wind, fire, metal. Beneath them, she was merely human. But once dressed, she became the pivot of the universe. They did not dress to be beautiful, they dressed to sustain heaven. In ancient decrees, silk was called jai, meaning the order of threads. For every strand carried a duty to hold the cosmos together, to keep chaos from tearing through the seams. When the emperor appeared in his golden robe, the 5-clawed dragon coiling across his chest, no one spoke. Not out of fear, but reverence. They understood this was the only light permitted to be looked at directly. On a stele from that era is written, "He wears the sun, so we may see the day." That was the creed of Eastern power. The ruler does not rule, he radiates. And while China wore gold to honor heaven far across the western horizon, Byzantium was weaving a different light, the light of faith. In Constantinople, purple was sacred. No one but the emperor and empress could wear it. Purple was not born of nature. It came from crushed murex shells, thousands slain for a few drops of dye. 1 gram of color cost a human life. Thus, when a child was born within the palace, they said it was born in the purple. To be born in that color was to be born inside the will of God. In the Hagia Sophia, light poured through panes of gold and violet glass, spilling onto the priest's embroidered vestments. The patterns were silent hymns. They did not speak, they glowed. Here, fabric did not cover the body, it prayed. The Byzantines believed the human form was too earthly, so they draped it in layers of silk, so that when light passed through stained glass, one would not see the flesh, but light itself moving. A priest once said, "When the light touches silk, even sin seems holy." From China to Byzantium, from gold to purple, humankind learned to weave power into holiness. No one dressed for themselves. They dressed for heaven, for God, for order. Yet behind every robe, there was still a body tired, small, trembling, because whether gold or purple silk remains thin. And heaven, however, finely embroidered, is always too vast to fit within a sleeve. When night fell on both capitals, Chang'an and Constantinople, lamplight flickered against golden and violet silk, then faded. Only the warmth of human breath remained in the dark, a silence like the space between 2 folded layers of cloth. In the end, clothing never spoke merely of color or rank. It told of the fear of losing control. From the hides of prehistory to divine brocade, humanity kept stitching the same illusion that it could understand the universe by wearing it. When the final light dims, all emperors look the same, lying still wrapped in plain white cloth. No gold, no purple. And one question drifts between 2 civilizations. Was it power Or was it faith that we were really wearing all along? From the first animal skin to the last dragon robe, humanity has never stopped clothing itself in difference. The rope belts of the Paleolithic, the yellow silk of Tang China, the white togas of Rome, the red saris by the Ganges, all are variations of the same obsession to be seen, to be set apart, to be remembered. We dressed to fight the cold, then dressed to fight oblivion. We wrapped ourselves in fabric and called it culture. But when night falls, and emperors, priests, dancers and merchants all lie still, every layer is finally undone. What remains is only skin, warm, thin, and breakable, the same for everyone. Perhaps every civilization is only weaving another cloth thinner, invisible, and calling it order. As the last glint of gold and violet fades, the reflection disappears. And in that brief darkness, humanity realizes it has never merely worn clothes. It has worn time, belief, and the illusion of difference. And when we cross into a new age, one where power is no longer woven from thread, but from secrets and energy, we will find that though garments change, the desire remains the same, to wear the light. Only now that light will not come from silk or gold, but from fire and atoms. And this time, it will not shine to adorn, but to burn the world bright. For while the few have learned to wear the light, the rest still tremble in the darkness of their own making. From the crude firelight of caves to the shimmering crystal glow of palaces, humanity has always chased the same illusion that it stands apart from nature. Once they huddled close to the flames, hands trembling from the cold eyes, fixed on the embers, making sure tomorrow would still be warm. Now they sit beneath high ceilings, gold light, white light, LED lights so bright that they can no longer tell which kind of light is real. The first people to fight for a place nearest the fire did not know they were inventing power. The one with the larger axe sat at the center, the weaker ones at the edges in shadow. A small difference in warmth, and thousands of years later, it became thrones and hierarchies. Perhaps every dynasty, every regime, every revolution has only been a shifting of seats around the fire, who gets to be warmed and who gets burned, who is seen and who must bow. And beneath the fluorescent sun of the modern world, you can still hear it, the quiet crackle of ancient embers. You can still see mankind dividing the heat among themselves, forgetting why they ever needed it in the first place. No throne was ever built in a day. It began with one man sitting closer to the fire than the others. That night, in a nameless cave, a small group huddled around a burning heap of coals. The wind howled at the entrance, carrying the smell of mud-burnt fat and wet fur. The fire was the only thing that made them forget they were afraid. One man, larger, better at hunting, sat nearest the flames. The light struck his face, and his eyes seemed to glow almost divine. The others stayed back, rubbing their hands together for whatever warmth was left. No one spoke, but order had been established. No laws, no contracts, only fire, and who sat closest to it. From that moment, the idea of the center was born. Those within the circle of light were seen, heard, and fed first. Those in the shadows, colder, hungrier, quieter. No one called it unfair. It was instinct, a reflex older than language. And so the seed of power sprouted in the faint smoke of a winter night. A woman threw another stick into the fire. A child asked, "Why do they get to sit closer?" No one answered. The adults kept silent, as if the question itself was dangerous to hear. There in that smoky cave, privilege was born, and it would never die again. At dawn, the man at the center rose, first picked up his stone axe and went out to hunt. He brought back more than his share. The others bowed their heads and said he deserved it because he protected them. They called him the strong one, then the leader, and later the king. Power always justifies itself with necessity. The one nearest the fire says he does it for everyone, and the rest believe him because if they didn't, they would be cold. Another night, the fire burns low. Those on the edges shiver, watching the strong one, sleep wrapped in thick hides. They wonder, does warmth feel different? when someone else is freezing. Tens of thousands of years later, we traded fire for gold caves for electric light. But the game never changed. Who sits closest to the glow, who is illuminated, who remains unseen. At every feast in every age, someone eats first, someone waits. Someone sits at the head of the table, someone stands behind the chair. Every society is just another circle, around a fire rebuilt with new materials. Leather seats, chandeliers, background music. All elegant disguises for an ancient ritual deciding who gets warm first. A philosopher once wrote, "Civilization began when someone sat down and refused to share the fire." Perhaps he was right. For the moment humanity learned to keep warmth for itself, it also learned the art of distance. The distance between the have and the have-not, between light and shadow, between us and them. Fire ceased to be natural. It became property. To hold the flame was to hold power. To lose it was to become invisible. From a place by the hearth to a throne in a palace to a leather chair in a boardroom, every form of authority began with the same small gesture, keeping the warmth instead of sharing it. So tonight, if you sit by a fire and see someone shivering in the dark, remember, the flame once belonged to all of us. We have simply forgotten how to share the heat. When the tent became a castle, mankind thought it had conquered nature, but it never realized it had only built the first prison with chandeliers. The first stone walls were not raised to boast, but to block the wind. Then they grew thicker, higher, colder. Those who lived inside could no longer hear the forest, only their own echoes. The fire, once the heart of the circle, shrank into a candle on a banquet table. Light was no longer for warmth, but for display. Inside castles, light was never warm. Stone kept the cold, and power kept the silence. Outside, the wind sighed through the trees. Inside, a small flame trembled between two silver candlesticks, casting flickers on carpets and half-emptied goblets. Here, people ate in quiet. No one told stories as they once did by the fire. Every word was measured, every glance a chess move. As the walls grew higher, faith thickened with them. People began to believe they were the center of the world. When you live among marble, every cry beyond the walls sounds like mere weather. In old paintings, kings and queens sit in the middle of the frame. No one painted the chill of the palace or the distance between two figures sitting side by side. A servant adds wood to the hearth. The flame flickers, but the warmth never reaches the throne. Between them lies ceremony, beautiful and deadly. The king looks at the fire but dares not reach out. That is privilege and curse. The mighty loved stone because it outlasted flesh. They built palaces of it to prove eternity. But stone does not care. It only echoes the sound of lonely footsteps. In Mesopotamia, a king slept in a chamber 30 paces wide, guarded by 20 soldiers. No one dared speak to him after the lamps were out. He was the strongest man in the land and the most surrounded. Power begins like fire, warm, approachable. Then it is guarded, contained, imprisoned, and when no one touches the flame anymore, it dies. Those who once sat closest to the fire now sit in cold rooms wrapped in silk and gold still trembling. At Versailles, light danced on mirrors and crystal. 1,000 candles burned each night, so the king could see himself as the Sunday. But that light carried no heat. The palace smelled of jasmine, yet the marble floors were as cold as tombs. Sometimes the monarch walked the empty halls hearing his own footsteps, echo like the sound of someone already gone. In those rooms, people no longer said, "I'm cold" or "I'm afraid." They said, "Yes, Your Majesty, as you wish." Even language was wrapped in velvet so no one would bleed and no one would touch. A courtier once wrote, "We built walls to keep danger out, but it was loneliness that stayed in." What was once a tool for survival became an art of isolation. The thick walls kept out enemies, but also song, laughter, and rain. The palace was a fortress of artificial light, where the true sun was only seen through gilded glass. And amid all that splendor, there were still the quiet shadows, the servants, the ash sweepers, the firekeepers. They were descendants of those who once sat on the outer rim of the fire, still shivering in the dark, still living off someone else's warmth. Only now they called it duty. One queen whispered during a feast, "So many people around me, and not one warmth to borrow." Perhaps she wasn't speaking of love, but of body heat. A castle, in truth, is just a polished cave, still dark when the lights go out, still echoing with the breath of loneliness, still with someone at the center and someone outside shivering. Walls in the end do more than keep out the wind. They keep out memory. They make us forget that power began as a small flame, and that once we survived by sitting close to one another. There is a small quiet truth that history rarely admits. Every civilization survives on hands that never rest. The hands that stoke the fire, sweep the floors, mend the clothes, pour the wine. The hands that history forgets to name. They are the real engines of the world. Only when kings built palaces did those hands receive their first uniform. When the king dined, someone stood behind his chair holding a jug of wine, eyes lowered back, bent heart beating in rhythm with the man he served. He did not dare look up, for even a glance was an offense. And yet he was the one who knew where the fire was, which coal was fading, when to add wood, so that the emperor's feast did not go dark. The firekeepers still existed, only now they worked not in caves, but in kitchens of stone. A servant in Versailles once wrote, "We lived behind the mirrors where the gold ends and the soot begins." They lived there, where opulence stopped and labor began. Their scent was not perfume, but smoke wax and other people's clothes. They were the silhouettes of history figures without voices. When the queen passed, they bowed lower, sometimes hearing the soft drag of her gown across the marble floor, a gentle sound that carried the full weight of hierarchy. Because within that rustle was the sound of division, who wove the fabric, who wore it, who washed it, and who was allowed to touch it. Outside the palace, the pattern continued. Cities rose, and the nameless became porters, cleaners, cooks, guards. Their work did not disappear, it was simply renamed. From servant, slave, attendant to worker, employee, all titles for the same ancient act, keeping someone else's fire alive. When you dine out and see a cook behind the counter, his arms scarred, his sweat falling into the dish, you'll call exquisite. You are looking at the descendant of the Paleolithic firemaker, still cooking by another's flame. When a hotel maid smooths your sheets and polishes the lamp so the light looks golden, she too is tending the fire, only now it burns as electricity. They no longer hunt mammoths, only time and wages. Still tired, still hungry, and still knowing if they stop the light will go out. There is a quiet law of history. Every empire is built by dirty hands. But no one writes that down because historians rarely sweep their own dust. Servants never sit though chairs surround them. Workers never rest, though clocks strike midnight. They have no tomorrow, only the next shift. They are recurring figures in every century, different clothes, same lives, calloused palms, bent spines, and the same unspoken question in their eyes. When is it my turn to sit by the fire? Sometimes they glimpse the flicker of power's flame in the great hall and realize the warmth outside is kinder than the cold inside. For within those walls, the light is too bright. Out here, at least, the cold feels honest. The world has changed, and not at all. The man who carved mammoth meat now wields a chef's knife. The cave firekeeper now turns on a gas stove. The one who once sat far from the circle now stands behind the curtain, and the circle itself unchanged. There is still someone at the center, and someone standing in shadow. A writer once said, "Every civilization has two kinds of people, those who eat by the fire and those who feed it." It sounds like a lullaby for the tired, because in our world, the cooks of the feast rarely taste what they've made. And so the circle repeats. Those who once trembled in the glow of fire now stand beneath neon light. Different tools, same positions. No one remembers their faces, but if they stop, the palace will go dark within a night. The ancient flame that once saved humankind from the dark still burns today, guarded by those who no longer have names. And they, the descendants of the first firekeepers, still keep the world lit, even though they themselves have never seen the dawn. The cave never disappeared. It was simply poured in concrete, sealed with glass, and fitted with power outlets. Morning, people leave their small apartments, walk past streets, glowing with LED light, and enter vertical caves, offices, towers, headquarters, corporations. They greet each other without meeting eyes and sit before screens. No smoke, no flame. Only light, steady, white, emotionless. It has no warmth, but it never dies. Once fire drove away the dark, now light postpones the dawn. Because inside offices time has no meaning. Outside it's noon, but inside it's always 8 a.m. The glow of 1,000 monitors bends every face into the same posture of prayer. No gods left, only email. Where fire once crackled, keyboards click. Air conditioners hum the lullaby of the 21st century. Coffee replaces roasted meat. Deadlines replace predators. And still, humanity seeks warmth in a world designed to stay cold. They say blue light is bad for the eyes. It's worse for the soul, because that light never dims. It pretends to be the sun, but offers no sunrise, no sunset, only perpetual awareness. The prehistoric flame allowed rest when it faded. Electric light does not sleep, and because of that, neither do we. Look around the office. Glass walls, sleek, reflective. Desks lined up like stone slabs. People sit across from each other without truly seeing one another. They speak in text, ask permission to talk through messages. Voices replaced by emojis. Smiles copy-pasted. Someone turns on a space heater, holds out their palms as if remembering a fire that once existed. Artificial warmth, burnt coffee, white light. A perfect recipe for organized loneliness. They call it a workplace. But it is in truth a cave with Wi-Fi. Humans still gather around light, still fear the dark, still hide their fear behind Zoom calls. They no longer hunt beasts, they hunt numbers. No longer break bones, they break spreadsheets. And like ancient hunters, they return with trophies. A report, a KPI, a message marked seen. A programmer once said, "We live inside light but feel darker than ever." Perhaps that's true, because when light no longer defeats darkness but only makes it transparent, we start to long for real night again. Evening comes. People go home but they don't leave the cave. They open another screen, Netflix, YouTube, the news. Each in a small, bright chamber, lit just enough to stop thinking, cold enough to stop feeling. Fire once made people tell stories. Electric light makes them fall silent. Sometimes in an empty office, someone sighs. The sound echoes like wind through stone, an ancient reflex the body remembering what it meant to sit close to others by the fire. Now we sit close through pixels and call it a meeting. No smoke, only signal. No breath, only ping. Perhaps civilization didn't move us out of the cave, it just made the cave bigger. We still live in the shadow of artificial light, waiting for someone to kindle a real flame again. But fire today needs no wood. It needs presence, a real voice, a real look, a real hand. Things rarer now than mammoths ever were. The old fire burned on wood. This one burns on current. But warmth is timeless. Without it, humans stop being human. A tired worker lifts his head from the screen, catches the eye of a colleague 3 meters away, and smiles. For a moment, the fire flickers again in this cold century. Then it goes out. Every fire dies. Only the ash remains. If you look closely enough at ash, you can see history there, not in monuments, but in what has already burned. Ash from the dry wood of cavemen, ash from Egyptian temples, from Rome, from Kyoto, from Hiroshima. They all share the same grey, and in that grey humanity looks more alike than ever. From fur to silk, from silk to wool, from wool to suits, every layer of fabric is a small attempt to forget the nakedness beneath. No matter what we wear, beneath it all is the same trembling body, afraid of the cold. We traded fire for electricity, caves for apartments, gods for technology, but fear stayed. Only now it's padded with comfort. Once we shivered because of the wind. Now we shiver because of silence. The silence between two notifications, between two messages, between two vibrations of the phone. A tiny pause deeper than any ancient pit of fire. The prehistoric man counted days by the Sunday. The modern one counts hours by battery life. Both panic when the light dims. The difference: the first added wood. The second plugs in a charger. In the ashes of every age, one thing repeats: humans cannot stand the dark. But they have never learned how to sit calmly in the light without fear. A physicist once said, "We built fire to survive. We built light to forget why." Maybe that's our most beautiful tragedy. The brighter it gets, the more we forget. The more advanced we become, the further we drift from the crackle of wood, the sting of smoke, and the tired laughter that once followed a day of survival. Now, as the world glows with screens and lamps, imagine that first spark, a trembling light, reflecting in the eyes of a caveman, wide, not with fear, but with awe. He didn't know what civilization meant. He only knew warmth. From that flame, everything began: religion, language, clothing, war, and the dream of control. Everything we call progress is just another spiral around the first fire. Then one day that flame was split, multiplied, and reborn as nuclear light. On the desert of New Mexico, it shone brighter than the Sunday. And 1 second later, humanity learned the meaning of the light of the destroyer. Since then, we've never truly slept in peace beneath our own glow. Look back from ancient embers, to atom from animal hide, to business suits from cave walls, to glass towers. Humans have always walked toward the light, but the farther we go, the colder it feels. Maybe evolution isn't a climb up a ladder, but a circle: fire, power, light, then ash, loneliness, and remembrance. We began by building fires to survive, and ended by maintaining light, so we wouldn't have to face its fading. If you sit still long enough, you can still hear it: the wind in the cave, the crackle of wood, the breath of those whose names are gone. All still here in the ash. No civilization ever truly disappears. It simply burns and returns to the earth, a quiet reminder that every light remembers. And perhaps amid all our progress, what humanity lost was not its wildness, but the art of sitting by the fire, just to listen to the wind passing through. The last fire still burns, but no one sits around it anymore. Only the wind passes through, and a few stones slowly lose their warmth. On the rooftops of glass towers, the lights stay on all night, but no one hears the crackle of wood. No one remembers the smell of smoke caught in hair, or the gentle heat creeping up their knees when they sat too close. We have replaced everything fire with electricity, silence, with background noise, memory with data. And in return, we've lost the smallest thing of all: the art of being still. Perhaps among all our progress, what we truly lost was the art of sitting quietly by the fire, simply to listen to the wind passing through. A simple art, yet once it reminded us we were alive. The light of humankind still burns bright, but with every step forward we leave behind a little warmth. And maybe someday, when the world grows weary of its own brilliance, someone will light a small fire again and sit beside it just to hear the wind go by. The voice fades until only breath remains and ash. And so, from the first spark in a dark cave to the blinding flash on a desert morning, we've always been chasing the same thing: warmth. Not just the kind that melts snow, but the kind that keeps us from disappearing. The warmth of company, of memory, of knowing someone else once sat beside the fire and thought the same quiet thoughts. History isn't a story of kings or empires. It's a long, flickering journey of human beings trying to stay warm in an endlessly cold universe. From ashes to atoms, from hands blackened by smoke to fingers glowing blue from the light of a screen, we've never really stopped playing with fire. So, close your eyes, let the fire fade, and drift into the quiet memory of the first night. The sleepy historian wishes you good night. If you enjoyed tonight's quiet journey, subscribe to Historian Sleepy 365, where history drifts softly one night at a time.